So tonight we are to hear of the prominent Italian musical family who were well known in Edinburgh 250 years ago, the Corri family. But before we discuss their success in Scotland, we must first consider how they came to this place. And in fact, yes, this place, where they actually performed in this very room on numerous occasions. They were prominent performers, promoters, and even fixers for this very venue. They were fixers for the Edinburgh Musical Society who would come here to hear the finest and most fashionable music. And while the Corri family were from Rome, the events that brought them to Edinburgh actually began in Scotland. On the 16th of April 1746, Charles Edward Stuart, otherwise known as the Bonnie Prince Charlie, failed to reclaim the British throne. The young pretender, as he was commonly known in Britain during the period, escaped to France, where he spent the next decade attempting to find ways to raise another rebellion. He even worked with Louis XV to launch an invasion on England in 1759, though this too failed. His father, James III and VIII, died on the 1st of January 1766, and Charles moved into his accommodations at the Palazzo del Re in Rome on the 23rd of January. Pope Clement XIII gave permission for him to move into those accommodations, though he never recognised him as the true British monarch. This is where the Stuarts and the Corri story collide. One, a family of fallen royals, the other, a working family who provide services for those in elite classes. In fact, Charles Julian Downey in 1905 fictionalised Prince Charles and how he spent his time in Italy in his dramatic poem in 5 acts called The Last of the Stuarts. Though fictionalised, Domenico Corri, one of the first Corris to come to Scotland, features prominently in one particular scene, which I would like to share with you. Setting the scene at the beginning of Act 2, Downey writes, "A servant enters with a tray of wine for his evening guests, an Italian servant at that. He escorts another native of Italy, Domenico Corri, the musician."
His Highness, is he ready to receive his music master?
I shall wait upon him, Signor. Whom shall I say?
You know not. You have attended on his Majesty so many months.
I am a stranger, sir, new to his household, as are all his men. The Count is brushed off as old servants.
Strange. What means this anti-caprice fancy, eh?
Thinking is not my duty, and besides, my tenure is by no means certain, sir. Already he is wavering in his will under the pleas of a Scotchman.
Scotchman? I understand. You need not tarry longer. Tell him Corri has arrived. Another of these tales. The all accord and the determined malice to depict him monster. I, his friend, will probably guess good reasons of defence. Rather, indeed, you wrong in the invention of excuses. The truthful and slander. If the Scotch are gone, 'tis at the Scotch offender's resolution. They that repeat this tale therein accuse this man of manhood. Curse the Highlanders. Who can speak ill of one so musical? Surely I can price, except he fail beneath this tender art some tuneless then. Spectres that have no bars to sing the lays of their uncanniness. Some dance of death. Nay, I let my love arraign his Highness for hypocrisy, as one confronts a knave in prayers or chances on a highway kissing his children. What? Hypocrisy for smugglers to love music? If well they love their song, or they no longer thieves but men? Divinest art, the Sabbath of the soul, the purge of evil, be the trysting seat of love and wisdom. Let the battle smoke a tarnished visage, and the lying cord grace o'er with placeless smile of his countenance. Music is candour, though it is always kind. Quiets the heart without deceiving. Rage, as rage is well, 'tis rage at ugliness.
Could we have the volume up a bit?
Coming. Here Downey presents Domenico not just as a supporter of Charles, merely because he is his music master, but as a Jacobite. This is furthered later in the scene where the prince enters and the two men speak and play with one another. a musical banter laden with symbolism regarding, it's already up at full.
Okay.
Yeah. A musical banter laden with symbolism regarding the failed rebellion, the plight of the Highlanders, and a yearning for Scotland. Downey's poem was written long after the Scottish Highlands had been cleared of their people, culture, and traditions. What is intriguing is that his poem is grounded in factual evidence. But first, let me explain who Domenico Corri was. Though initially destined for the priesthood, Domenico realised his talent for music from a young age, and with the support of his father, initially studied singing, violin and harpsichord with Antonio Arisicchio and Bartolomeo Lustrini. He claimed to have worked as an instrumentalist at the age of 10 for two important theatres in Rome, the Teatro d'Alberti and the Teatro Argentina, though I've not been able to verify that through archival records. Later, he moved to Naples, where he studied with the legendary Nicola Porpora. Porpora was a famous singing master who had trained illustrious vocal stars famous throughout the continent. They included Farinelli, Caffarelli, and Porporino. Porpora, Domenico said, opened the doors to opportunities to perform for the elite in Rome, particularly the British nobility and aristocrats who had travelled to Rome on their grand tour. But Domenico managed to obtain more than just a one-off performance. He secured a position with the Stuarts and lived here at the Palazzo del Re. The Stati d'Anime records that list the personnel who lived and worked at the Stuart court in Rome list Domenico Corri as the Maestro di Cappella, or chapelmeister, from 1767 until 1771. The year he came to Edinburgh, and he was not the only Corri in residence. His father, Antonio, was employed as a candanziere, or yeoman confectioner, from 1769, though he'd offered services from 1767. He remained employed at the Palazzo for the next 2 decades. His entire family lived with him there, including his wife and their 6 children, including Domenico. Along with Domenico, 2 of his brothers, Giambattista and Natalie, would move to Scotland, where they established prominent careers in music. Now, Downey did not have access to all the archival records, at least I don't think, that I've been able to consult, but he did have Domenico's own autobiography, which he clearly used as inspiration for his poem. And here's what Domenico has to say about his relationship with the prince. So he says at the end, "I usually remained alone with him every evening, the prince playing the violoncello and I the harpsichord, also composing together little pieces of music, yet these tete-a-tetes were of a sombre cast." You can see here that there is no mention of his father or siblings living at the Palazzo. In fact, there's very little mention of any member of his family throughout the autobiography. He briefly mentions his father, noting that he supported his study of music, and his wife Francesca, who he claimed was his pupil, thus painting himself in a more prominent light, since any success of hers was actually Domenico's by association. Other points in Domenico's autobiography are even more misleading. For example, he claimed that he was employed as a conductor of the Edinburgh Musical Society, but that's not true. Francesca was employed to be the Edinburgh Musical Society's leading singer, and Domenico was fortunate enough to tag along for the ride, given that the pair were recently married. After all, the Edinburgh Musical Society couldn't very well ask a married woman to come to a foreign country and sing for a season without her husband. Giambattista, who anglicised his name to John, and Natalie are never discussed, despite the fact they were Domenico's business partners for the majority of their careers. So why was Domenico writing this autobiography, and what is the real story about his life in Britain? Well, I cannot cover everything, but I thought I would use this presentation to discuss some of the more scandalous parts of his life, and why he might choose to disguise some of these encounters, or at least downplay them when he can't disguise them in his autobiography. What these stories also unveil is Domenico's significance in Edinburgh and how his ambition shaped music, theatre and culture in the city at the end of the 18th century. And the first question that comes to mind that might have an obvious answer: were the Corris Jacobites? Given the support they received from the Stuart family and the relationship Domenico claimed to have with the young pretender himself, The simplest answer is yes. But in reality, the situation is much more complex. So why would he include the story of the Bonnie Prince Charlie at all? Well, in 1810, Charles Edward Stuart and his Jacobite rebellion were romanticised in both Scotland and England, particularly in song and in books, such as Ralph Griffith's Ascantius or The Young Adventurer, which recounted the life of the young pretender. As discussed by William Donaldson in his book The Jacobite Song, where he states that in the 20 years following the rebellion, Highland dress and Highland culture had for centuries provided an inexhaustible source of derision and contempt. Now, in the opening decades of the 19th century, we find Lowland Scots triumphantly embracing these symbols in a mood of exhilarating national revival. Donaldson goes on to show that older Gaelic songs were updated and given new lyrics to discuss contemporary issues, such as the war with France. In the song The Garb of the Old Gaul, the Highland clans aligned to battle the French enemy, as opposed to an English one, as was the case with the earlier iteration. Other songs blatantly romanticised Charles, though were careful to align the song with pro-monarchist values rather than explicitly pro-Jacobite. In his autobiography, Domenico could use the story of his relationship with Charles Edward Stuart to reveal that his talents for music at a young age had allowed him to secure a prominent position with a well-known royal figure, a figure who had caused so much controversy and political upheaval before disappearing to the continent, where he lived a reclusive life far from his beloved homeland. But at the time, Domenico could not be seen to still be an explicit Jacobite supporter, as that could have, at best, alienated him from customers and patrons he relied on for business. To get round this, he continuously mentioned aristocrats and elite men who were Hanoverian loyalists, including mentioning these three men. Like the songs, Domenico used Jacobite romanticism to attract attention and intrigue, but ensured his readers knew that his true supporters were Hanoverian loyalists. In reality, his two brothers and his wife, Francesca, had all benefited from their relationship with the Stuart court in Rome. Indeed, though Domenico, Francesca and John had only resided at the court for a few years, Natalie, who came to Edinburgh much later, arriving to join the family business in 1784, had lived at the Palazzo del Re for well over a decade, which is perhaps why when he arrived in Britain, he was able to jump straight into multiple areas of work. You see, unlike his brother Domenico, who apparently had very little English when he arrived in Britain in 1771, at least according to Fanny Burney, who was Charles Burney's daughter, and took a few years to perfect his spoken and written English, Natalie appeared to have no limitations, a strong indication he had developed his language skills while in the Stuart court. Unfortunately, Natalie did not write an autobiography of his own, so he did not share anything publicly of his life in Rome. So what happened when Domenico and Francesca came to Edinburgh to perform for the Edinburgh Musical Society? Well, I'm going to break this down into two sections. The first discussing the music they performed and how this established the Corris as prominent promoters of Scots song, and the second will focus on the family's scandals while here in the city. Domenico's autobiography offers many interesting details about his life, but he speaks very little about the music he and his wife performed, especially in the early days of their time in Edinburgh. To find information on their programmes and what made them popular spectacles in Edinburgh, I had to dig into the Edinburgh Musical Society documents and newspaper archives. For his first concerts performed in 1772, Domenico's repertoire, as listed in the Caledonian Mercury, was fairly indistinct. He was advertised as playing an ovatura, likely on the violin, though the instrument was not mentioned, singing a buffo song and other serious songs, which would become a feature of several of his concerts, playing a concert for the harpsichord, and singing a chorus with Francesca, John Smiton, and Cornforth Gilson. Presumably, the advertised buffo duetti was also sung by the couple. The type of repertoire performed was replicated in other concerts throughout the year, allowing for maximum flexibility for the Corris to choose what to play and sing. In December 1772, Francesca performed Chiara Fonte, while Domenico sang a Scots song. This was one of the only concerts in which he sang such repertoire, as it was Francesca who quickly developed a reputation as a Scots song singer, making them a feature of her programmes from 1772 until she permanently left Edinburgh for London in around 1788. Domenico and Francesca were not the first to include Scots song repertoire in their concerts, but rather they built on a long tradition of Italian singers incorporating Scots material into their programmes. Prior to the Corris' arrival, Maria Doria was regularly advertised as performing Italian and Scots song, though what was performed was not stated. And unfortunately, there was no song sheets bearing Maria Doria's name that were published, which would have given a clear indication of the Scots repertoire she performed. A decade earlier, Cristina Passerini similarly advertised as performing Scots song, such as One Day I Heard Mary Say, a song attributed to Robert Crawford of Achnames and published in the second volume of Alan Ramsay's Tea Table Miscellany in 1726. She also sang popularly known songs such as Tweedside and the Bush o' Bun Traquair, also published in the first volume of Ramsay's Tea Table Miscellany. I'm going to play for you a recording of the Bush o' Bun Traquair, which is an arrangement published by the Corris in the select collection of the most admired songs, duets, etc. This was published about 30 years after Passerini's performance, and so reflected a more modern, fashionable song style, but it still gives you an idea of how the song sounded in the 18th century. Passerini performed concerts for the subscription series at Taylor's Hall and at concerts for St Mary's Chapel, Niddry Wynd. It was at St Mary's Chapel where the Edinburgh Musical Society first held their meetings before building St Cecilia's Hall. Since there was a clear precedent for Italian singers performing Scots song for at least 2 decades before the Corris arrived, it is possible the Edinburgh Musical Society asked the couple to include Scots repertoire in their programmes. Alternatively, the Corris may have come to learn that Edinburgh audiences had a taste for their native airs and independently made the decision to incorporate such material into their concerts. While Francesca sang many styles of repertoire, including opera, oratorio, canzonettas and English airs, it was her Scots song that received the most praise. William Tytler, writing in 1793, he described her as such, saying that we sometimes, however, find a foreign master who, with a genius for the pathetic and a knowledge of the subject and words, has afforded a very high pleasure in a Scottish song. Who could hear with insensibility or with being moved in the greatest degree Tenducci sing I'll Never Leave Thee or The Braes of Ballantyne, or Will You Go to the Ewe-Butts Marion by Signora Corri. The castrato Giusto Tenducci had performed with Maria Doria in a concert in 1769 where they both performed Scots song, but it was his concerts with Francesca that were beloved by the Edinburgh Musical Society audiences. Francesca's approach to singing Scotch repertoire inspired Scottish music publisher George Thomson to produce a select collection of original Scottish airs for the voice, a 6-volume collection of Scots song arranged by celebrated European composers, including Ignaz Pleyel, Joseph Haydn, and Ludwig van Beethoven. In a letter dated the 29th of March 1838, Thomson also reflected on how he was inspired by Francesca Corri. He says at the end, "It was in consequence of my hearing him and Signora Corri sing a number of our songs so charmingly that I conceived the idea of collecting all our best melodies and songs and of obtaining accompaniments to them worthy of their merit." Robert Chambers also published Thomson's memories of the St Cecilia Hall concerts in 1847, Traditions of Edinburgh, where he reaffirmed his admiration of Francesca's singing. Thomson and Tytler's observations about her singing are remarkably similar, and considering how often she performed such material, clearly her style was admired by many. Thomson would go on to include You Buts Marian and Oh Wally Wally in the first volume of his collection. And I'll give you another little flavour, this time a simple version of You Buts Marian. Will you go to the Ewe-Buts Marian, and wherein the sheep we be? The sun shines sweet, my Marian, but nay half so sweet as thee. The sun shines sweet, my Marian, but nay half so sweet as thee. These arrangements were embellished and structured, aligning more with typical compositional style of Western art songs than a simple Scots song that had been presented by Ramsay and latterly James Johnson, who worked with Robert Burns to produce the Scots Musical Museum. A number of years ago now, the editing Robert Burns for the 21st Century team brought together several students from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland and the University of Glasgow to perform these songs. And I thought I would share with you an old favourite, both then and still today. Here's none other than Beethoven's arrangement of Auld Lang Syne. What is clear is that there was an appetite for Italian singers performing Scotch repertoire throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, and the Corris made sure to capitalise it. Even Camilla Corri, Domenico and Francesca's sister-in-law, frequently performed within a mile of Edinburgh tune at her Edinburgh concerts in the 1790s. Domenico and Francesca's daughter, Sophia, would also incorporate Scots song into her London concert programmes, further popularising Scotch repertoire south of the border. Meanwhile, Domenico, John and Natalie created songbooks, sheets and educational treatises that showcased a blended Scots-Italian song style. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how that was actually performed and used in the day, then Mary Lawson is actually doing a PhD on the subject, so you can find out more soon. John and Domenico published a select collection of the most admired songs, duets, etc. in 1782 that included heavily ornamented versions of Scots song, such as The Lass of Petey's Mill and Gilderoy. He even made sure to publish a version of Queen Mary's Lamentation, which is styled as a Scots song but written by Giordani and performed by Giusto Tenducci at the Edinburgh Musical Society concerts. Here's a recording of me performing this song with Claire Haslin just a couple of years ago.
I
The song distills what the Corri family in particular were trying to achieve, a new approach to Scots repertoire that made it more fashionable for modern audiences, not just in Scotland but across Europe. Just a year later, they would produce a new and complete collection of Scots song, which provided further arrangements of Scots song with Italian embellishments. And even by the 19th century, the Corris continued to capitalise on Scots song, producing a select collection of the most favourite Scots songs. Blended Italian Scots songs were the Corris' bread and butter, sustaining them throughout their careers in publishing and performance. Now, what of their scandals? Well, the Corri family were involved in quite a few. That's no different to a lot of musicians at the time. Though the first scandal that they were involved in here with the Edinburgh Musical Society was perhaps a little more low-key and perhaps not publicly known. Domenico never mentioned the incident in his autobiography, but it does set the scene for future public scandals, which lets you know how they dealt with issues. By 1774, Domenico and Francesca were actively seeking opportunities to perform in cities other than Edinburgh. Domenico in particular was keen to showcase his compositions, as he clearly had aspirations to expand his musical portfolio. They had already performed in Dublin in 1773, and so the following year, musician and manager Thomas Vincent asked if they, particularly Francesca, would be interested in performing at the Rotunda in Dublin. The venue regularly held charity concerts for those who were lying in at the Rotunda Hospital, and presumably the Corri couple were to be one of these invited guest performers. However, Francesca had received a similar offer to perform in a series in London beginning December 1773 and thereafter for 6 months, which would clash with performances at the Rotunda. Though I don't have a letter from the Corris declining Vincent's request, there is no record they performed at the Rotunda in 1774 either. But neither did Francesca perform in London during the period, and here is the reason why. Domenico penned a pleading letter to John Welsh, treasurer to the Edinburgh Musical Society, where he described the generous offer made to them from unnamed directors in London, including a fee for the concert series and the promise of a benefit, which had the potential to provide Francesca with triple the amount of money than what she would have received if she remained in Edinburgh. Moreover, she had the opportunity to perform in the same series the following year. He feared that if she turned down the offer, the London directors, who were none other than Johann Christian Bach and Carl Friedrich Abel, would simply hire another Italian singer, and Francesca would be denied the opportunity to perform at all. Domenico furthered his point by explaining that she had frequently struggled with her health in Edinburgh, so a trip south of the border was sure to improve it. She was also pregnant, with her due date in the coming winter. As such, she would be absent from the Edinburgh Musical Society concerts anyway. He was really trying to pack as many reasons as to why they had to go as he could. Exactly when she was due to give birth is unclear, though presumably not in early winter, given that she was to appear in concerts around Christmas, according to Domenico's letter. Welsh denied the Corri couple's request. They would not be permitted a leave of absence from the Edinburgh Musical Society concerts. Though disappointed, Domenico accepted it and wrote that he and his wife would be at the meeting in early November. Unfortunately, Francesca did not seem to agree with her husband, and she did not follow through on the promise, instead travelling to London for 2 weeks and only leaving to return to Edinburgh on the 16th of November 1774. In her note of apology to Welsh, she stated that she had not asked the Society for permission to travel, as she did not think her absence would affect the concerts. She also took care to mention that her reasoning for making the journey was not to sing, but rather to dispel rumours being spread by an unnamed gossipmonger. But I could find no rumours appearing in print in London or elsewhere in Britain during this period. Perhaps she had successfully quietened the rumour, or perhaps there was no rumour at all, and she was simply making a powerful point. In any case, the Edinburgh Musical Society felt slighted by her travels, hence the need for an apology, which perhaps was made under duress. Francesca's actions did not actually seem apologetic at all. In fact, she withdrew from performances in Edinburgh entirely for the winter season, which also happened to coincide with the birth of her child. Where she had previously returned to perform quite quickly, this time she maximised her period of lying in, perhaps as a form of revenge. Chelsea Phillips explains that certain actresses, notably Susanna Chibber, used absence as a form of agency. For Francesca, removing herself from public performance denied the Edinburgh Musical Society her presence, despite their explicit request. If she was not to perform in London, she would not perform at all. At least, not for a time. She did return to sing on the 18th of February 1774 in a performance of Domenico's first large-scale work, the oratorio Bertollia Liberata. And I can only imagine the conversation that might have happened in their household to convince her to come and do this performance. The whole work appeared as a campaign on Domenico's part to encourage the directors to grant him the position composer to the society, a statement that appeared on the title page of the libretto and in the newspaper advertisement. Unfortunately, the Edinburgh Musical Society minute books never referred to Domenico as their composer, nor did they pay him an additional fee for his labours. From the beginning, they were always focused on Francesca and her talents, even despite Domenico's best efforts. But this did not deter Domenico from seeking opportunities to diversify his portfolio elsewhere, though not always to great success. 1778 marked the year that Domenico took over the management of the Theatre Royal here in Edinburgh. Previous managers of the theatre had struggled financially from the get-go. The theatre opened in 1769 with celebrated actor Wes Diggs becoming manager in 1771. However, as Rebecca Tierney-Hines explains, he was arrested for debts almost immediately. Despite his personal struggles, he continued to manage the theatre for the next 6 years, overseeing the emergence of several would-be famous actors, such as Tate Wilkinson and Mary Ann Yates. By 1777, he was arrested again and declared bankrupt. When Domenico took over the theatre the following year, he used his knowledge of concerts and other concert-based entertainments to try and attract audiences. His first idea was to host a masquerade, perhaps thinking that audiences would be intrigued to attend a costume dance event. However, the idea did not seem to appeal, with Domenico announcing on the 22nd of February 1779 that after taking advice of several ladies and gentlemen, he would not hold a masquerade, but instead a festino. The festival event boasted opportunities for dancing and for vendors to set up small market shops, similar in style to a fair. A variety of food was on offer for purchase, including cakes, fruit, sweetmeats, and jellies. I imagine this event to be similar in style to our modern Christmas markets. This first venture was so successful that Domenico opted to run it again just a few weeks later. Even so, the novel festino would not sustain the general day-to-day running of the theatre, and he had to find other ways to make and save money. But his decisions were not always favourable or indeed ethical when it came to the acting company. Disputes over pay were publicly printed in the newspaper, and these paint a dismal picture of Domenico's management. One such dispute was continuously recounted throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, a reminder to Domenico of just how badly he had misjudged the situation. Charlotte Melmoth, an actress best known for her work in tragedy, was employed by Domenico in 1778 to be one of the leading actresses in the company for the season. She'd already performed leading roles at Smock Alley Theatre in Dublin, Covent Garden and Drury Lane in London. Her engagement was surely a sensible one, and by April 1779, the two entered into a public spat, which I will share with you now. Now, on this occasion, I was actually able to share both sides of the story because they were printed, so I'm going to share with you their words rather than me interpreting it for you.
The Caledonian Mercury, 21st April 1779, Theatre Royal. Mrs. Melmoth, having no other method of being paid by Mr. Corri the large arrear of salary due to her, was obliged to take another benefit. She therefore respectfully solicits the patronage of the public on Wednesday evening next, the 27th instant,
Mrs. Melmoth, having no other method of being paid by Mr. Corri the large arrear of salary due to her, is obliged to take another benefit. She therefore respectfully solicits the patronage of the public on Wednesday evening next, the 28th instant. Please note, Mrs. Melmoth did not have trouble the public with a second application, but for demands she is at present liable to. As a proper judgment may be formed respecting Mrs. Melmoth's conduct in this matter, Mr. Corri begs leave shortly to state a few facts. As Mrs. Melmoth's character as a performer was, at least extremely doubtful in Edinburgh, Mr. Corri only engaged her for 12 nights as a trial. Some weeks of the season elapsed before an opportunity could be afforded for her appearance. In the meantime, she representing that her husband had abandoned her, and that she was consequently in a great measure destitute, should she no longer be engaged with the theatre, Mr. Corri, from a principle of humanity chiefly, has hitherto retained her salary of £5 a week. He leaves it with the public to determine how well she merited it. After her benefit night, the theatre was indebted to her about £15, 17 shillings and 5 pence. Disappointed in her expectations from the returns of her night, she immediately and ungently applied by means of Mr. Williams for a second benefit. Her salary, which had been arrested for a great sum, was allowed to accumulate as a security for the expense of said night, which she had prevailed with Mr. Corri to promise in writing. The expense of the theatre for one night is £35, and there would have only been about £30 due to her on the night that was intended for her benefit, and, consequently, a balance coming to Mr. Corri instead of her. It is a matter of indifference to the manager whether this money be paid to Mrs. Melmoth or laid out in charges for night. If he be able to pay the one, he can surely pay the other. On account of her violent audacity in this particular, she is dismissed from the theatre, a censure which, in his opinion, she has justly deserved, and as there was a considerable charge against her for dresses, which she undertook to purchase but did not, she must send security for the expense of her attended night if she persists in trying it. She will have an opportunity to justify herself at any point she may imagine she has been aggrieved in before the courts of law, in a process Mr. Corri has committed against her for the above atrocious and unprovoked attack on his character.
To the printer of the Caledonian Mercury, Sir, Audiet alterum partem. The above Latin maxim, if properly attended to, will never prove of the greatest service to mankind before they venture to decide on any subject which may chance to come under their cognizance or observation. When we hear that in our courts of law, an ingenious advocate open his client's cause, with that skill and address which these gentlemen are generally possessed of, it would well become the judges and auditors also to keep in mind that they are always two sides of a story, and that one, though never so pleasing or flattering, is perhaps only good till the other is told. Now, sir, what do you think has induced me to make these reflections? I am certain you will not guess in a hurry to tell you a secret, sir, which I don't care if all the world knows. Your paper originated them all. My paper, sir? What do you mean? Have a little patience, good sir, and I'll satisfy you. Let me tell my tale my own way, sir, and you'll hear it all in as few words as possible. Mrs. Melmoth's advertising for a second benefit. Oh, what? You begin to smoke me, sir, do you? Why then, sir, believe me, the same advertisement, what it did yours, raised my curiosity, and from the moment I saw it, I began to think what sort of a man this Mr. Corri must be. However, sir, my old adage came immediately to mind, and I determined to grant the suspension to my own opinion, till I heard the other side. I had not to wait long, for in your paper of Saturday I perceived an advertisement addressed to the public, in which I found Mr. Corri had been as much surprised as I was curious. Now, says I, we shall certainly have an excellent defence, for I have heard, sir, that Mr. Corri is a mighty ingenious man. But guess my astonishment, when in reading it through, I found that instead of making good the other side of the story, it had only, in so many words, proved more plainly what Mrs. Melmoth had asserted. Such a set of higher cynicism was never in my memory, were crowded into a small space. What can Mr. Corri mean if he supposes that his memory left him, insane some weeks of the season elapsed before an opportunity could not be afforded for her appearance. Mark how a plain tale should put him down. The theatre opened on the 14th of November. On Saturday the 21st, Mrs. Melman played Callista. This was only 7 days. According to what calculations is this to be computed to give Mr. Corri's account and the truth, the least presentations to keep company? Again, after her benefit, the theatre were indebted to her about £15, 17 shillings and 5pence. Her salary, which had been arrested for a great sum, was allowed to accumulate as a security for the expense of said night, which he had prevailed on Mr. Corri to promise in writing. What, sir, was this arrangement for a great sum laid by Mr. Corri, who owns that he was considerably indebted to Mrs. Melmont? Or was the person who laid it so extremely kind and friendly to that gentleman as to lay an arrangement purely for Mr. Corri's interest, and to indemnify himself against any deficiency in the charges of Mrs. Melmont's benefit? There seems to be a solace rhythm in this which I should be glad to have explained, either by Mr. Corri or his secretary. Mr. Corri allows there would have been £30 due to Mrs. Melmont on the next Wednesday night, her intended benefit, but the expense is £35, and consequently a balance in favour of Mr. Corri. Granted, but how was Mrs. Melmont, without having a benefit to get this £30, acknowledged to be due to her? The whole town has been some time informed that not only Mrs. Melmont, but every performer of the theatre, having long failed in getting anything from Mr. Corri, except that they got the deduction of arrears and the expenses of the house at their benefit. How then, sir, could we agree with Mr. Corri either as to Mrs. Melmont's demerit or audacity in doing what she has done, or that she has justly deserved a dismission from the theatre? Supposing he has a right to give it to her, which I deny. In my mind, sir, Mr. Corri is exactly in the same predicament with respect to his publication. Take my advice and do himself any service. He should take advantage of a second publication and either discard his present secretary or at least put upon him his guard to attend more to truth, facts, and congruities. I am, sir, your very humble servant, Squib.
Who was the latter author who summarised the dispute and favourably backed Mrs. Melmont? Well, it's difficult to say, but they did neatly highlight the issues, pointing out Corri's errors. She was not the only actor to enter into a pay dispute with Corri. Robert William Bailey also published an angry letter in the Caledonian Mercury just a month later, noting that he too had not been paid. Thereafter, several members of the company took legal action against Domenico, which resulted in his bankruptcy. Indeed, the following statement, which was made in the journal New Joe Miller, or The New Tickler, published in 1800, where Domenico had apparently passed comment on the whole messy business. He said, "I have had 47 lawsuits, all of which I lost, except one, and that costed me £3, 17 shillings and 4pence for the winning of it." And actually, all of these lawsuits can be read in the National Records of Scotland. So he was sued a lot. He sold the lease for the Theatre Royal to Tate Wilkinson and never took on the management of an entertainment venue again. In his autobiography, he stated the following: "I became soon after involved in various and troublesome avocations. I introduced him as manager of the Vauxhall at Edinburgh, manager of its Theatre Royal, established the pianoforte manufactory, embarked in music selling, etc., etc., thus plunging into a perplexity of business which distracted for a time my attention from the original pursuit," which was to publish a select collection of songs, duets, etc. Clearly, this was an event in his life which Domenico would rather have forgotten entirely, but perhaps thought it too publicly known not to at least mention it in passing. That was not the end of Domenico's financial woes, or indeed black marks on his character. After having helped to establish the publishing house Corri & Co. with his brothers in Edinburgh, he moved with Francesca and his children to London in 1788 and established a second publishing house there. This had the potential to be a successful, long-lasting venture with opportunities to share fashionable music between the Edinburgh branch and London. But a series of unfortunate events plagued the London house. Firstly, Domenico had invited his son-in-law, Jan Ladislav Dušek, to join the company in 1794, creating Corri, Dušek & Co., and they seemed to get on well enough for the first few years. However, cracks in the business started to appear. John Corri, who had been responsible for much of the administrative running of the Corri businesses, died on the 3rd of February 1798. Thereafter, tension in Domenico and Dušek's relationship emerged, with Dušek agreeing to work with a different publisher to produce his compositions. Rumours of bankruptcy swirled throughout 1799, and in early 1800, Dušek fled Britain, arriving in Hamburg on the 5th of February. By April 1800, Domenico was declared bankrupt, and at least according to Lorenzo da Ponte, Mozart's former librettist who'd moved to London, he was thrown into Newgate Prison, a place that housed those in serious debt. However, I have not found any archival records that suggest Domenico was imprisoned at this time, though da Ponte did suggest that he was released after a short time on a pardon. It is also possible da Ponte was misremembering events, or the more ungenerous review, vengefully attacking Domenico's character. His memoir was published in 1823, just 2 years before Domenico's death, and within it, da Ponte recounted that an arrangement with Domenico and Dušek had seriously damaged his business and reputation. Though they published good fashionable music, da Ponte stated that they were, quote, both buried in debts, and neither the one nor the other had sufficient sense to conduct their business at a profit. He was speaking in hindsight here, only realising the extent of Domenico's issues after he had entered into a partnership with them, where they subsumed his music shop into Corri, Dušek & Co. Da Ponte ended up inheriting their debts, claiming to have lost 1,000 guineas. Of his character, da Ponte pointedly described Domenico as a man of good talent in music, but frivolous, visionary, and sometimes a liar. Of da Ponte, Domenico made no mention of him in his autobiography. Though I could find no evidence of Domenico entering debtor's prison in 1800, there are records of Domenico in debtor's prison on 2 other occasions, the first in 1814 and the second in 1816. By this point, he was an ageing man, desperately trying to rebuild his reputation, which had been tarnished by his past actions. His 1810 autobiography was just one attempt at him trying to show himself as a talented, multifaceted musician who, despite some brief mentioned blips in his career, had mostly achieved success. And from a certain point of view, he had. He was, by the time of his death in 1825, he was celebrated as a composer and teacher who had literally fathered a new generation of musicians that were making their mark on the music industries in Scotland, England, and Ireland and America. His name has continued to be discussed in scholarship, more so than many of his other family members, though I am currently working to showcase the work of the entire Corri family and their impact on the music scene in Britain. I started this presentation by discussing Domenico Corri's links to Charles Edward Stuart, and then showcased some of his successes and struggles after he had moved to Britain. But what does this teach us? It's important to remember that Domenico and his family were immigrants in Britain, and though they had come to Scotland to work, their contract was only for a short period. They had to prove themselves in order to make their life here, and clearly Domenico had ambitions to make that life financially and reputationally successful. Indeed, unlike many Italian performers employed by the Edinburgh Musical Society who came to perform for a short while before returning to the continent, the Corris remained in Britain, with Domenico and Francesca residing in Edinburgh for 20 years and his brothers for much longer. That meant they had to learn how to navigate the complex world of British politics, and they perhaps recognised very early on that their being from Rome, their potential links to the Jacobite court, their faith, which I have not had time to discuss this evening, and preference for performing highly embellished music would not be welcomed by all. Despite this, they popularised embellished Scots song through performance and publishing, found support from both Edinburgh and London's elite, built multiple music businesses from the ground up, and ensured their children and grandchildren found their own success within the British music industry. Though I've shared with you several of Domenico's scandals, which ultimately tarnished his own reputation, the Corri name remained synonymous with quality music making for over 2 centuries, a testament to the family's overarching success. Thank you very much.